Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming out to Firebase Live. This is our live show where we're going to be showing new Firebase content. And during these videos, make sure to go to the chat in the description because we're here to be talking with you and answering your question while the video plays. And after the video is over, the show doesn't stop. We're going to be having a live show hosted by me where we're going to bring on the guests from the video. We're going to be answering your questions and just talking about all the things you bring up in chat. So we're super excited to talk with you all, and we will see you in the chat.
Who are you? And are you actually who you claim to be? That's the basic question every authentication system needs to answer. Welcome to another episode of Firecast, in which we will talk about authentication and how to make implementing Sign-in with Apple easier by using Firebase. Knowing who your users are can be more or less important to your app. For a camera app that stores photos in your local camera roll, probably not that important. Storing notes in a note-taking app that your users want to use on their other devices, definitely useful to have some sort of identification so they can sign in on their other devices to access their data. Sharing data between multiple users with various levels of access, you're going to need a solid authentication and authorization system for sure. Implementing authentication and authorization has always been a challenging task, and it's easy to make mistakes. Not only that, but it consumes time that you'd probably rather spend on implementing the key functionality of your app. Thankfully, Firebase provides a powerful and easy-to-use authentication solution that is integrated with many of Firebase's other products, such as the real-time database, Cloud Firestore, Cloud Functions, and others. Firebase Authentication is a drop-in solution that you can easily integrate with your iOS, Android, and web applications. It supports a number of ways for users to sign in to your app, such as password authentication, Facebook login, Google sign-in, Sign-in with Apple, and more. Thanks to Firebase's support for Sign-in with Apple, it is now easier than ever to build iOS applications that allow their users to sign in with a simple biometric check, all without having to care about passwords. And thanks to mandatory two-factor authentication, this is super secure as well. Today, I want to show you two ways to implement Sign-in with Apple using Firebase. The first one is super quick and will get you started in literally less than 5 minutes. The second one is a little bit more complicated, but provides a lot more flexibility. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you a couple of use cases that you can implement once your user has signed in. So make sure to stick around till the end. Firebase UI is an open source library that is available on iOS, Android, and the web. It is built by the Firebase team and addresses many common use cases that developers encounter. For example, it simplifies Firebase authentication by providing pre-built UIs for all authentication providers that are supported by Firebase Authentication. Thanks to Firebase UI, you can implement Sign-in with Apple in just a few steps. So let's have a look. To get us started, I've already created a simple UIKit application that just displays a simple button which says Login. I then created a Firebase project, registered my iOS app with it, downloaded the Google Services info.plist configuration file, dragged it into my Xcode project, installed the Firebase SDK using CocoaPods, and called Firebase app.configure in my application delegate. No idea what I'm talking about? Watch this setup video first, and then come back. So when using Firebase UI, implementing Sign-in with Apple becomes a 3-step process. Step 1. To use Sign-in with Apple in your Firebase project, you'll first need to activate it. In the Firebase console for your project, enable Sign-in with Apple in the Authentication section. Back in Xcode, add the Sign-in with Apple capability on the Capabilities page in the Target settings. And finally, add the Firebase Authentication SDK to your app by installing the Firebase UI pod. Step 2. In our app, we've got this nice little button here on our UI. We want to trigger the login process when the user taps this button. To do that, let's first create an action handler by right-clicking on the button and dragging to our view controller. Next, we need to instantiate Firebase UI's default authentication UI. Firebase UI supports multiple sign-in providers at the same time, but we just want to use Sign-in with Apple for now. So let's create an array that contains only this one provider. We set the delegate to self, which means we'll need to implement the did sign-in with auth data result method, which we'll do in a minute. Finally, we retrieve the auth view controller and present it modally. Step 3. Now let's implement the did sign-in with auth data result callback. This callback has two parameters, one with the result of the authentication process and another one in case something went wrong. We can extract the signed-in user from the auth data result and then print their user ID and other data, such as the display name or their email address, in case they decided to share this with our app. You're now ready to run the application and sign in with Apple. Well, this wasn't too bad after all. And the great thing about Firebase UI is that it makes it so easy to support additional authentication mechanisms. Adding a new authentication method is a matter of just a few minutes and requires almost no coding, as Firebase UI does all the heavy lifting for you. Check out the documentation at this URL to learn more. So at the beginning of this video, I promised you to show you another way to implement Sign-in with Apple, which begs the question, why would you even do this? Especially since Firebase UI makes our lives so much easier already. Well, firstly, implementing this yourself gives you slightly more flexibility. Also, it's always good to understand how things work under the hood. Plus, it's a lot of fun, so let's dive in. So just like for the first example, I've created a single view application and connected it to the same Firebase project. Sign-in with Apple is already enabled for the Firebase project, so we can go straight to Xcode and add the Sign-in with Apple capability to our app. And finally, install the Firebase Authentication SDK by adding the Firebase Auth pod to the pod file and running pod install. While this is running in the background, we can continue and build a sign-in screen with the Sign-in with Apple button on it. To do so, I'm going to import the Authentication Services module and then instantiate AES Authorization Apple ID button as soon as the view appears. When the user taps on the login button, we want to display a sign-in screen with the Sign-in with Apple button on it. So let me quickly create an action handler for this and a method to start the sign-in process. Then let's connect the handler method to the button. With this basic plumbing in place, we can now create an authorization request. Let's first create a helper method to keep our code nice and tidy. In the method, we first ask the Apple ID authorization provider to create a new request for us. By specifying the email and full name scopes, we tell the API that we're interested in these pieces of information about the user. I'd like to point out that Apple encourages developers to limit the scopes as much as possible in the interest of the user's privacy. So keep that in mind when implementing this in your app. In the next step, we will compute a random string that helps us to prevent replay attacks. This random string is also known as a nonce, which is short for number used once. The Firebase documentation contains an implementation of a secure nonce generator, which we're going to use. Now, let's generate the nonce, compute the hash and store it in the authentication request, and finally, store the raw nonce in a local variable so we can retrieve it later. To better understand why the nonce helps prevent replay attacks, let's have a look at this flow diagram. First, in your app, you create an AES Authorization Apple ID request, which includes the scopes you're requesting, as well as the hashed nonce. The app holds on to the raw nonce in memory so it can send it to Firebase in a later step. This ensures an attacker can't get hold of it. Next, iOS will display the sign-in dialog and guide the user through the login process. When returning from the sign-in flow, Apple will return an AOS authorization Apple ID credential, which contains an ID token. This ID token represents the user that has just signed in via Apple's authentication dialog. The token contains an opaque user ID that Apple uses to identify the user, as well as the user's email address and full name according to the scopes you requested earlier. The ID token also contains the hashed nonce we sent in the first step. As the ID token is a cryptographically signed JOT, we can verify its integrity. And this actually happens in the next step. So in step 3, we create an OAuth credential using the ID token and send it over to Firebase, along with the original unhashed nonce. Firebase will then verify the ID token as well as the nonce. To verify the nonce, Firebase hashes the raw nonce using the same hashing algorithm we used in the first step, and then compares the result with the hashed nonce in the ID token. If both values match, all is well, and we can be sure that we weren't victim of a replay attack. This works because we use the nonce just once and create a new nonce for every new sign-in process we start. So even if an attacker was able to capture the original request, it would be impossible for them to unhash the nonce, as we're using SHA-256, which is a one-way function that is easy to compute but hard to invert. Finally, Firebase will return an auth result, which contains the signed-in Firebase user. Now that we've got the request, we can instantiate the authorization controller, set the delegate and presentation context provider to self, and then kick off the login process. Before we can run the app, we need to stub out the delegate methods. It's a good practice to use extensions to manage delegate implementations, so let's introduce 2 extensions here. One for handling the authentication callbacks, and the other one for handling the presentation context. This lets us specify which window should host the authorization controller. At this point, iOS will display the Sign-in with Apple UI and walk the user through the process of signing in. It will show the privacy information screen, ask them whether they're happy to share their email address, or would rather use an anonymous one that Apple manages for them, and then call back into your code. So far, none of the code we've written is specific to Firebase. In fact, it should be very similar to Apple's sample code. But now, let's switch it up a gear and connect to Firebase. To do so, we'll need to turn the ID token we received into a Firebase credential, and then ask Firebase Authentication to sign in with this credential. So here in the did complete with authorization callback, we first extract the authorization credential provided by Apple. Next, we perform a couple of sanity checks. For example, we make sure that the current nonce is set, because if it's not, we're in an undefined state. We then retrieve the ID token and convert it into a string. Using the nonce and the ID token, we can now ask the OAuth provider to mint a credential representing the user that has just signed in. In the next step, we will use this credential to sign into Firebase. Firebase will verify the credential, and if it is valid, will sign in the user. In case this is a new user, Firebase will create a new user account using the information provided in the ID token. In the callback, we can now retrieve the Firebase user from the auth result and display the user's information. Oh, and in case you were wondering, Firebase will persist the user's credentials in the iOS keychain and retrieve them at application startup. So if you want to check if the user has already signed in, you can use this code snippet and update your UI accordingly. And this concludes our brief introduction to implementing Sign-in with Apple using Firebase. So, where do we go from here? Well, first of all, I would like to encourage you to implement Sign-in with Apple on all other platforms your app is available on. This will ensure your users can use the same credentials on all platforms. This is really important as most users will use your app on multiple platforms such as their phone, their desktop computer, and maybe a tablet. The Firebase documentation contains guides for implementing Sign-in with Apple on the web and on Android, so go and check them out. You should also start looking into any other authentication providers that your users may expect in your app, such as Google Sign-in or Facebook Login. One authentication provider that I find really useful is anonymous authentication. This lets you create and use a temporary and anonymous account to authenticate with Firebase. This allows users who haven't yet signed up to your application to access data provided by Firebase security rules. And once your users decide to sign up with your app, it's easy to link their anonymous account to an identity provider such as Sign-in with Apple and turn them into a full account so they can sign in from their other devices as well. Finally, and most importantly, start implementing functionality using some of Firebase's backend services. For example, you could use Cloud Functions to send new users a welcome message, or store data in Firebase real-time database or Cloud Firestore. Firebase provides security rules to help you secure your application and make sure users can only access data and functions they're allowed to. Check out Todd's and Rachel's video about setting up and testing security rules to learn more. And in a sad event that your users would like to stop using your app altogether and delete their user account, there is the Delete User Data Firebase extension, which provides an easy way to clean up after them. There is much more than we can cover in this video, so go ahead and check out the Firebase product overview at this URL. And there you have it. That was an overview of how to implement Sign-in with Apple using Firebase Authentication. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, and be sure to tell me which authentication provider you want to learn about next in the comments below, or at Peter Friese on Twitter. See you next time in another episode of Firecasts.
Hey everyone, welcome to the live after show. That was a super in-depth video on Apple sign-in, and I hope that you dropped a lot of questions into the chat because this is the time where we go and answer them. And if you still have questions, if you're watching now, you aren't too late. Just drop them into the chat because we're going to just be picking them up as we go along. But like always, I can't answer these questions myself, so I'm going to pull on two people. You should, if you've been following the series, you should know very well by now. Of course, Peter, and also from last week, Tyler Crowe. Hello. Well, thank you for joining us on the live show, you two.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing, David?
That's doing good. So we had a lot of questions today, and Apple sign-in. I say it's new, but like, it's not that new, but still, it's like new enough that you could have a lot of questions about it. I'm like, you still you got to cut your teeth on it. So,
Absolutely.
But what I always like to start out with a really like an easy but fun question. So I'm going to start with my own personal question, and that is, what is your favorite Firebase Auth sign-in method? And I will start off with, I'm sorry, who? I was going to say it's Peter, but I don't know who that is. Who are you over there?
Well, so, I have to confess that my personal favorite is anonymous login, obviously. But once I'm signed in anonymously, my personal favorite, obviously, is Sign-in with Apple, for sure.
I see what you did there, because you had the hat and the glasses, and then you were there, but we didn't know who you were. So I could authorize you, but I couldn't really identify you. And then what a clever, it's like a physical pun. So Tyler, what is your favorite sign-in method?
So Peter definitely nicked mine a little bit there, but amazing little hat thing, Peter. Anonymous auth, I think, is absolutely awesome. Being able to get a user into your flow without actually forcing them through the sign-up flow, which can cause a lot of user drop off for your app, I think is absolutely awesome. That way they can interact all over your app, and then when they're ready to sign up, right? You've hooked them with the great thing that you're doing in your own app. You're able to fully log them in, which I think is so cool and is so powerful.
Totally. And I guess for my own, I feel like I would always say anonymous auth, but like you two have already like covered that. But one thing I will say about anonymous auth that no one thinks about when they start using it is that not only do you get all those great things like you said, having anonymous user and the upgrade, but anonymous is kind of a hard word to spell. And then when you are signing in with anonymous auth a lot and you're typing it out, you learn how to spell anonymous. And I think that is a very overlooked benefit of using anonymous auth. So there's that. But I would say my favorite, that if I can't use anonymous authentication, I would say I like GitHub authentication because a lot of times if I'm doing something where I need to use GitHub's REST API, that gives me a really nice, lead into that. So GitHub auth, I would say if I'm not using anonymous. I also really like Google auth, obviously, but I'm trying to. Of course, the Google person saying the Google auth, so I'm not going to do that one either. So I'll say GitHub auth. They're all good though. Let's be real.
Okay. Obviously, GitHub sign-in is extremely nerdy, so it befits you. So one of the things I really like about anonymous auth is, as Tyler said, it makes it so easy to, let people start using your application without you having to, change your entire data model just because you wanted to give them a first free experience to using the app, right? So there are so many applications out there that ask you to create a new account the first thing when you start the application. And I mean, that's just the worst user experience. So how many times have you downloaded an application and then, it tried to make you sign in or sign up, and then you were like, but I don't know what the application actually does. I want to try it out. And, once I really like it, I might commit, but I, might not. So if you're not giving users the opportunity to try the application, then you are probably going to see a huge drop-off. And this is why anonymous sign-in is so great, because users can, they come in, they have this anonymous user account without really, the user recognizing it. And then only later, when they decide, OK, this app is really a great application, I want to continue using it, then you can ask them, OK, so you want to share, for example, a to-do with a friend, or you want to invite them to a chat or whatever your application does. And then you can ask them, OK, so now we actually need some more details about you. And why don't you sign in with Apple? Or why don't you log in using Facebook or GitHub? Probably for an app that allows you to share code, I guess, David?
Yeah, and I like that solution for like guest experiences, because you don't have to like partition your code base or do like some crazy exception to try to have someone log in as a guest. You can write your code as if it's an authenticated user, because an anonymous authenticated user is still an authenticated user. So that is a really nice way to say, I'm pretending that I always have an authenticated user, because it's not really pretending, you do, but it doesn't have to be a bona fide user, like someone who would be logged in with another, a more permanent authentication system. So yeah, I like that a lot, because it makes your code a lot cleaner, and you're not like splitting your brain in half thinking about how do I let someone browse unauthenticated versus authenticated. So yeah, it's a great pattern. I enjoy it myself. But so that was just my question. We already went that deep into that. So that's nuts. I imagine that was the easy one. So we'll see what happens when we do the real questions. So our first question comes from Hamoon, and Hamoon asks, since iOS 14 in the JWT that Apple gives to iOS and should be verified in the backend with Apple's server, there is a real user status. that shows if the user is real or not. That's a good name for that. How can we check the value of this real user status variable in Firebase functions or auth? And I'm going to have let either of you two take that. That is one that is over my head.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So, once you sign in with Apple, you get back the Apple ID credential, and this carries the real user status field, and you can basically look at that, and then it tells you, is this a real user, or are we unsure, or is it not a real user? So that's information that Apple gives you. And I suspect they're probably using a couple of heuristics, and the fact whether or not you authenticated using Face ID or not. And so you can read this field in your code. So if you use the approach I showed you, then you can decide what you want to do with that. So Apple suggests that if you see that this is a real user, a real person, and not, for example, a continuous integration server, then you should give them like the VIP experience and treat them like a VIP. So you can do that. I would encourage you to take a look at a sample application that I built a couple of weeks ago. It's called Make It So. It's a simple to-do list application. It's out on my GitHub repository, and it's got sign-in with Apple implemented. It's entirely built in Swift UI. And but the principles being used for signing in with Apple are easily applied to a normal UIKit application as well. So you can definitely use this field.
So now I have a follow-up question there, Peter. For your Make It So app, what was the commit message? What was your first commit message?
Oh, probably ta-da! Initial commit.
Was it Make It So? Oh man! See, I start all my projects. You just missed out. That was like such a meta moment there.
So building to-do application is kind of like a thing that I do. So for my previous project, I built another one which is called Do It Already. So.
See, I start off all my initial commit messages with Make It So. So that could have been your commit message, and it would have been so deep and meaningful on so many levels. Big missed opportunity there, but you'll know next time. That was a great answer, Tyler. Do you have any elaborations there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, Peter, you really covered the swath there. So I think this would be a good time to move on to the next one.
All right. So our next question, this is a good one. A good one is I know that we're going to be able to answer it. So those are the best ones. So this question is, and I am sorry, I'm not going to be able to say your name correctly because I'm bad at pronouncing names. That's why they gave me this job. So Prabha, I'm very sorry I can't get this right, but you know what? Hit me up on Twitter afterwards and you can teach me, because I think it's very important to say people's names correctly, and I don't want to ruin your name on behalf of my ignorance. So your question, though, I love it because all of us can answer this, is can we expect login with GitHub anytime soon? And since I know it, but I'll let Tyler, you take this one.
David, you're jumping at the bit. You gotta just go ahead.
So we have sign in with GitHub. So it's there. It's been there for a good amount of time, and it's cross-platform. And like I said, that was my favorite. One, if I couldn't use Firebase Auth, the GitHub one is really great because unless this has changed since the last time I've used this, which I don't think it has, one of you two, you can correct me here, the token you get back from GitHub is already signed and compatible to use with their REST API. So you can just, after you sign in with GitHub with Firebase Authentication, the token that comes back with it, you can just start firing against their REST APIs. And that's really cool because if you're building a some GitHub style clients. There's lots. GitHub's constantly coming out with new features. So if you're building maybe some integration with GitHub Actions or whatever have you, where you need to add like a secret, or you want to list out repositories and stuff like that, or see the collaborators and all this great stuff, you just log in with Firebase Auth and GitHub, and then just query the REST API. I did this myself. We wanted to see how many open source contributors we had from the community, so non-Firebase developer or non-Firebase employees contributing to the whole Firebase organization. And so I wrote a little app that queried all of our repos, counted up all the commits and everything of people who were not a part of the org. And it was surprisingly easy. And actually, I did it all in AppScript to make it even crazier.
So do you remember how many people actually bore the result?
I believe it was 1.6 million lines of 1.6 million commits, maybe, or was it lines of code? I can't remember. Both sound maybe
That's
it was
impressive.
1.6 million lines of code. But what I do remember is that yes, it was 1.6 million lines of code added from the community, and there was nearly 1 million lines deleted, though, which was also good. Deleting lines of code is just, I just love that. It's a great experience. It's very, very refreshing.
Yeah, good code help is always great.
That's me on GitHub. Does anybody have anything to say about GitHub Auth?
Oh yeah. Just today, somebody else mentioned the good feeling you get from deleting old code and, basically like making your app more lightweight. And that reminded me of an application that you could send your spam emails to, and it would reply with poems. And I thought, well, that would be really nice if you delete stuff in your code base, and then maybe you could fire off a GitHub action, and then it would reply with, I don't know, maybe with a haiku, or maybe with a little Hello World application written in a language that you are yet to learn. So maybe that's a nice little challenge for our community.
Wow, poems are great. So I can't really just like recite a poem right now, but but I wish I could, because that would have been drop some Robert Frost, or I don't know, whatever else I should have been paying attention to when I was in college and high school. Because fun note about me is I did my entire CS degree in like a year and a half, because I was really like a lit and political science major. So I just got it all done in like a year and a half. So I did study poems and stuff. But
wow.
But that's a whole other platform. So we have another question. Of course, it's the question show. And this one is from Manuel. And Manuel asks, I want to incorporate sign-in with Apple and iOS 12, but import CryptoKit is only available in iOS 13 or newer. And so it is not possible to use SHA-256 for data from the current nonce. How should I manage it? Another moment where I'm glad that you two are here.
Yeah, so I mean, you don't necessarily have to use CryptoKit. You could potentially use another library that gives you the same algorithm. So I would probably try to find if you can find another implementation of SHA-256 that is based on a different crypto library. But yeah, I'd probably have to dig a little bit deeper. So maybe that's something that we can follow up on. Except Tyler, you have got an idea.
Yeah, so this is actually, since I'm also kind of struggling to think of another option, Peter, this is another good opportunity where you can file an issue against us on GitHub, and then we can go back and do some research on our own and come back to you with the best answer. The live option here is awesome. It's a great way to interact with us. But like we mentioned last time, we're super, super active on our open source GitHub pages. So if you come and file an issue on us like this is a perfect one where someone from our team, potentially myself, another engineer, someone within Firebase will be happy to answer you with the right set of tools.
Yeah, totally. And if you go look at our GitHub repositories for all the various things we have in the Firebase org, whether it's the iOS SDK, JS SDK, Android SDK, the Firebase Tools CLI, the Firebase Tools UI, so that's the emulator repo, you'll see that not only are we responding to a bunch of issues that people in the community, file, that we actually file issues on ourselves, or it's our own internal way of working with that as well. So I'll file something, and then I'll be like, hey, feature request, you should be able to do this. And then someone responds, yes, you should go do that. And then I go do it, and it works. So that's how we do it. So never feel like, oh, they probably get a lot of issues, or I don't really have a place for that. No, absolutely. That's not us just saying that. You should totally, if you have an idea or if you're having a problem, especially like that, we are totally here in those issues. So like Tyler says,
and I gotta
totally
say
true.
the team is extremely active there. So I'm subscribed to some of the iOS repositories, and like every morning when I wake up, like there is this deluge of emails coming in from GitHub with all the issues that people have filed and all the replies that our teammates have answered. So definitely it's a great opportunity to reach out and like get answers from the people who build it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another question, obviously. Lots of great questions here. And this one comes from Keith. And Keith asks, is it possible to add Apple Auth sign-in to a Firebase web app without having an Apple developer account, which costs 99, I think that's a pound. I'm also bad at currency symbols. So
99 currency units. I think it's
99 currency
probably
units,
99 units wherever you live, I think.
Yeah. They might normally. That'd be, oh man, I'm definitely gonna search that when I leave, because that popped into my mind. How does it go across different economies and countries? So yeah, but I don't know
so,
this.
So I think the answer to that is no. Because you'll have to go into the developer portal and do a little a couple of setup steps there. So usually when you build an iOS application, Xcode does most of that for you. So for what you saw me doing in the video, I did everything in Xcode. So I didn't go to the Apple developer portal and do anything there. So for the normal stuff, you can get away with using Xcode. But as soon as you want to integrate, for example, the email relay, you'll have to go to the developer portal to do a couple of setup steps. And this is where you'll have to shell out 99 currency units. I'm not entirely sure. They do support enterprise accounts. I'm not entirely sure about the pricing for enterprise accounts these days. It used to be a little bit more expensive, but then it's for the entire team. And then you can spread it out. So if your company builds not just one application but a couple of apps, then obviously it makes sense. And then I guess the idea behind paying your way into the App Store is that ideally they want to make somehow see some sort of commitment from people, and then you can use in-app purchase to get money back from your users and things like that. So I think this model encourages developers to come up with some sort of sustainable business model. But to your question, the answer is no.
Also, I think depending on your use case, from the question, I totally can't glean into what the use case is here. But if you are just managing a web app, it is unlikely that you need Apple sign-in, because if it's cross-platform, Apple and web, then absolutely, then it's a total convenience. But if you just have a web app, and there's no iOS connection to it, then you probably don't need that. It might seem like a really cool option, but some of the features that come with the Apple sign-in really shine best when are combined with like an iOS app or iOS account as well. So I'd really look into just seeing what you're doing. And if you have an iOS app, absolutely put them on both. That's the best experience. But if it's just a web app and there's no iOS connection to it, it might not be something you need. So just look into that. So that's my 2 cents.
So I like to add to that. So if you support any one sign-in method on any one of your platforms,
yes,
you should also support it on all of the other platforms, because it's I've seen a couple of apps doing that, and it's just less than ideal user experience. So you sign in, let's say you sign into the Android app, and they support Google Sign-In because it's the native or the it's the most common sign-in method there. And then you also download the iOS app because you want to use it on your tablet, for example. And then they don't support Google Sign-In, and that is just how am I supposed to get back to my data in that case? So then you'd probably have to sign in using email, and then how do you make the connection between your email sign-in and your Google sign-in? So it's just inconvenient for the user. So if you support one sign-in mechanism, support it across all your applications on all platforms.
Yes, and this we're really diving into this one, but also that just I've seen a lot of people talk about a similar problem to this on Twitter and our YouTube channel and a lot of places where people will log in to an account on the Android app with Google, like you said, and then maybe they download it on they have an iPhone, iPad, or something like that, and then they're prompted to, or they're like, oh, maybe I'm going to use Apple Sign-In here, and then they now have 2 accounts because one with the Google Auth, one with Apple Auth, and that talk about how that can be a confusing experience. With Firebase Authentication, you can enable a 1 email per account policy, which is really nice because in code you'll get this exception that's like, hey, provided the person has the same email accounts across certain social platforms, but you can get notified that, hey, this email is already registered in your system with another account, and then prompt them to sign in with their original account, which may be what they want. But if they do want the accounts linked, then you can use Firebase Auth's account linking functionality to merge the 2 together. And so the next time when they log in with either one, it just takes them to the same account, which is really great experience. So that's there's some UI on your side there as the developer to detect that exception and to prompt them and stuff. But that extra mile, I think, is really what can set your app across. It's just a great experience for the users.
Yeah, totally. And I think sign-in is such. I find that sign-in is such a complicated topic, and it's really, really difficult to communicate to users in a straightforward way what they're doing. And I think that is one of the problems that social login providers have or have been having. For example, when you sign in using Facebook, then obviously people might be a little bit timid, and they might be wondering, so can the app post to my timeline? And with Google Sign-In, similarly, especially back in the days of Google+, can it post on my behalf? And then they're kind of hesitant. And you have to keep in mind that if you sign in using one of those identity providers, which I think is a much better name than social sign-in, it basically just means that you're using this authentication service to prove that you are the person who you claim to be, and that is the service that this identity provider provides to the application developer, to the app that you are signing into, and that's about it. Using the scopes that the developer requests, they can decide how much information they want to have about the user, how much information they need about the user, and what they want to do. And if an application does want to do more than just know who the user is, they need to request a lot more scopes, and then the sign-in dialog will say, okay, so this application requests the right to do whatever, and then the user can see that, and then they can decide, oh no, that's not what I want, and then either turn that off or decide to not sign in using that provider. And this is one thing that Apple has really doubled down on. So they say, we're just providing, if you don't request any additional scopes, they will just give you an opaque user ID. That's it. So just an identifier that you can use to identify a user, and you don't even know what's their name. You don't get a profile picture and anything like that. You can just, it's just an identifier. And then if you request more scopes, you can ask, okay, I want to get the email address as well, and I want to get their full name. Those two scopes are supported. And then the user can decide, actually, I want to change the full name that I appear with in the application. So they can change. So I could decide, I'm signing into an application. I'm not going to be Peter Friese, but I'm going to be Fred Firebase, and change my full name. And then I can decide to also obfuscate my real email address and use Apple's Relay service. And then they will, generate this random email address that they're handling on the developer's behalf. And then the user can be sure that their email address is not compromised and being used behind the scenes to do whatever tracking applications might want to do. So this is built with security in mind, and to give people peace of mind, and make it really, really simple to just tap on the button, sign in, and if you're using a modern iPhone, you just have to look at your phone, and then it will detect your face and you're in. So I think it can't get any easier than that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Tyler, you have any elaboration there?
Yeah, no, I wanted to touch on both of your points about account linking, as well as all these extra security measures that Apple has given us, and just highlight, like Peter, as you said, it's awesome being able to be a user and be confident that you're protected. And especially when it comes to account linking, I am the most forgetful person around. I will log in with Facebook one day, my email, and like maybe a password the next day, and then Google the day after that.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you can seamlessly link all of these accounts together is absolutely awesome. That being said, with Apple's extra security measures, it is sometimes harder to link those two if you're not actually giving an email. So that is something to be aware of, as with the extra security, it is a bit of a double-edged sword. You won't be able to have kind of that like seamless account linking that you normally do. So
because the email will be generated every time.
Exactly.
So it depends. So if you decide to provide your real email address, then they will do that. But I think what Tyler is hinting at is that Apple will only provide the full name upon the first sign-in to an application. So if I decide to sign into an application using Sign In with Apple, the application will only receive my full name on the very, very first call. And then you need to make sure to keep track of that. And if you're using Firebase, you'll want to store this into your Firebase user to keep track of the full name. If you forget to do that, then you don't have the user's full name. When Apple launched this, people asked them on the forums, so this sounds a little bit like a flaw or an issue, and then their reply was, no, it's a security feature. We want to make sure that applications can't just request the user's name like anytime. We want them to request the user's name just on the first login, and then if they actually need it, keep track of that.
Totally. Well, that was a lot into that. We went totally digressed in super interesting topics, but I'm going to move on to the next question now from Ramiro. And Ramiro asks, and Tyler, I think this one's going to be for you, is there any plans to support Active Directory, LDAP, ADFS, and SAML? And what about G Suite? And I feel proud because I actually know what like three, maybe four of those things are. So yeah.
Yeah, so I can answer that. In terms of our roadmap, we as Firebase don't commit to anything in the roadmap, but I can tell you that these are actively under development and being looked at right now on the long-term roadmap. So I would keep your eyes peeled as more updates come out, because we definitely want to continue supporting more form factors, especially LDAP and SAML. SAML is actually already available on our sister platform, Identity Platform within Google Cloud. So if you poke your head over there, you will be able to use it there, and that does integrate with Firebase. It won't be the same kind of Firebase Auth look and feel, but it will work with your Firebase Auth application.
All right, awesome. The next question comes from Rachel, and Rachel asks, what are the limits of anonymous authentication? When should I use it or not use it?
So I can start on a few, and then maybe
ahead.
Tyler can jump in. Yeah. So one of the limits is that if you sign anonymously on one device, let's say you sign in on your phone, and then you go to your other device or one of your other devices and you sign in there as well, then these are two entirely separate accounts, because the library detected, okay, there is a new user, and there is no way to make the connection between those two. It might even, even if you're on the same platform, let's say you're signing in on your iPhone and on your iPad, but even more so if you're signing in on an iPhone and an Android device. So there is no way to make this connection except for if you upgrade the account on one device. So if you want to do that, you can sign in using anonymous auth on device A, and then once the user has added data or wants to share something with their friends, you ask them to upgrade their account using an identity provider, let's say Facebook login, and then they upgrade, and then on their other device they can sign in using Facebook, and they come into the same account, and all the data they started adding on device A will be there on device B. So that is one of the limitations. I always forget the limit in terms of how many anonymous accounts your authentication database can hold in a Firebase project, but I'm pretty sure Tyler knows.
Yeah.
So
you can only have
Tyler.
Yes, you can only have 100 million anonymous auth accounts, and
Oh
to be
gosh, I'm
clear,
gonna need a new auth provider. Only 100 million.
Yeah.
yeah, got to build a really popular app. And one of the things that people fall into is they want to use anonymous auth kind of as a permanent auth solution, and that's something we strongly don't recommend. Um, in this case, anonymous auth is really just to be that temporary warm onboarding experience. Let your new users coming in get their feet wet, trying out all the cool features in your app, and then upgrading them to a permanent user and removing that anonymous account later. Sometimes some of our developers like to use anonymous auth accounts as a form of security. For their Firestore or real-time database, they'll say auth is not equal to null, and then they'll use anonymous auth accounts to sign in users. One of the troubles here is that's actually a lot less secure than most people think. Having a way to identify who the actual user is provides much, much more security. So in terms of building out and securing the data within your database, we actually strongly recommend saying auth is not equal to null, and it's not an anonymous auth user as well. And that will provide kind of a baseline. It's still not perfect. There's much better ways to do it. And if you want to go take a look, there's, from 2 weeks ago, we had a video about how to handle security rules. But as a baseline, you really want to make sure that it's a signed in user that's not using anonymous.
Yeah, totally. And anytime you write auth not equal to null as a security rule, that should really be only be a convenience to signed in users versus actually as a layer of security, because it's basically read-only data or publicly readable data behind a wall, like not in like a glass wall, really. So your rules should be much more granular to the access. So whether you're securing it by the UID, whether they belong to a role like I have a role or a group, there's lots of great videos on our channel about doing RBAC, role-based authentication control, to set up more, secure and sophisticated roles. So yes, auth not equal to null, not all, sometimes it works, but for the most time, unless it's data that you would be somewhat fine with having publicly readable, I tend to think, you got to write the rule to be a little more specific. So that is all the time we have for questions for today. You all asked so many great questions. We have 2 auth pros on. We just talk auth all day, but we got an hour. So thank you to so much, Tyler and Peter, and thank you for joining us and all of your auth knowledge.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so that was week 3 of Firebase Live. That was awesome. I always like I said, I always love talking about auth. Next week, we're going to be rolling Firebase Live again, and hard to keep things in my head straight, but I believe next week we're going to be talking about Google Analytics, and I will not be hosting this, which, if that makes you sad, don't be sad, because you're going to get Frank Van Puffelen next week, who is the Stack Overflow question answering extraordinaire. So you'll be in great hands, and I'll be watching. I'll be excited. I'll be in the asking questions in the chat and stuff. So thank you all so much. We have a code lab going on after this, so make sure to tune in. And then also improve your app. That's in the show notes. It's a great game to learn all about just exactly what it says, all these improvements you have through your app. And there's a lot that you can learn. It's a really great interactive experience. So check that out in the description. So thank you all so much for showing up for week 3 of Firebase Live, and we will see you same time next week.